My husband left me on our anniversary. Then I learned who he married next. My name is Isabella. I'm 36 years old, and on June 12th, I thought I was about to celebrate two milestones at once, our 8th wedding anniversary, and my husband Tyler's birthday. I wanted it to feel special, not extravagant, but meaningful. I left work early, drove across town for his favorite bottle of red wine, even picked up Wagyu short ribs from a butcher I'd never gone to before. I strung soft lights along our tiny balcony, ironed a simple ivory tablecloth, and ordered a custom cake with Toad Tyler Happy Birthday and Anniversary written in smooth vanilla frosting. By 7, I was dressed and ready, a little perfume at my wrist, candles glowing on the table. 8 o'clock came, then 9. My text went unanswered. By 9:30, I called, listening to his voicemail pick up after 5 hollow rings. At exactly 10:35 p.m., an email dropped into my inbox. No greeting, no warmth, just sorry. Big client emergency. Have to stay at the office. We'll make it up later. No thank you, no happy anniversary. I sat there in the half-light staring at the table. I had set the napkin I had folded just for him still in my hands. The candles sputtered and died on their own. The cake never left the fridge. Eventually, I packed everything away. I didn't cry. But something inside me shifted quiet and irreversible, like a plate sliding off a shelf before the crash. The next morning, I tried to move like nothing had happened. Coffee, makeup, commute. Still no word from Tyler. At noon, I broke and called his office. The receptionist paused, then said, "Oh, Mr. James resigned 3 days ago." Resigned 3 days ago. My husband hadn't just skipped dinner. He'd been living a lie under my nose. I left work early, every stoplight blurring past my grip, white on the steering wheel. When I opened the door to our apartment, the air felt wrong, like someone had already said goodbye. The shoe rack told the truth first. His favorite brown leather pair was gone. "Tyler?" My voice echoed down the hallway. In our bedroom, he was standing by an open suitcase, clothes tumbling into a duffel bag. He didn't look up right away, only muttered, "You're back." "What is this?" My throat tightened. "I've accepted a new job," he said flatly. "In Albuquerque. I start next week." It hit like a blunt instrument. "You quit your job and didn't tell me? You just vanish." He reached for a folder, set it on the nightstand, and flipped it open. Divorce papers. My name typed neatly at the top like a replacement label on a box. "You're no longer the wife I need," he said, his tone rehearsed, detached. "You've neglected your duties. Always working, always distracted. I need more." The words clattered around my head like loose change. Neglected, I worked, I cleaned, I cooked when he let me. But more than anything, I waited. For him. For scraps of attention. For a marriage that had been evaporating one night at a time. I clutched the papers, my fingers trembling. "After 8 years, this is how you tell me." He zipped his suitcase. "Don't get in my way." And then he walked out. The door clicked shut neat and final like the gavel in a courtroom. I sank to the floor, divorce papers crumpling in my hands, the echo of his footsteps fading. It wasn't the first time Tyler had abandoned me, but I knew with brutal clarity it would be the last. 2 days after Tyler walked out with nothing but a suitcase and a look that told me I was already history, the phone rang at my office. I answered automatically, still running on muscle memory. "Mrs. Isabella James?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, speaking. This is the management office for your building. I just wanted to confirm that we received Mr. James's request to terminate your lease. He left a note stating he no longer resides there. According to policy, the remaining tenant will need to vacate before the end of the month." Her words echoed like static in my ear. I gripped the receiver tighter. "Remaining tenant?" I repeated. "Yes, ma'am. That would be you." The world tilted. I could hear my own pulse fast and frantic over the woman's polite, detached tone. The remaining tenant. As if I were some leftover scrap in a house we had built together. Not a wife, not a partner. Just excess baggage to be cleared out with the lease. I thanked her, mechanically hung up, and stared at the numbers flickering on my computer screen. My colleagues laughed across the office, oblivious. To them, it was just another Tuesday. To me, it felt like a guillotine had dropped, cutting the last thread of security I had. That evening, when I unlocked the apartment door, I stood frozen in the entryway. The place looked the same, our couch, with the faint wine stain from New Year's, the bookshelf filled with novels we'd promised to read together, the fridge humming softly in the kitchen. But now it all felt staged, like a museum exhibit of a marriage that no longer existed. My eyes drifted to the shoe rack. His favorite brown leather shoes were gone, leaving a hollow space like a missing tooth. I whispered his name out of habit, Tyler. The silence that answered was so heavy, it pressed against my ribs. I walked into the bedroom. The bed was still half made, his sides stripped bare. The closet door hung open, hangers swaying from where he'd yanked clothes down in a rush. The suitcase's absence screamed louder than any goodbye. On the table lay the folder he had shoved into my hands days earlier. Divorce papers. His neat signature scrawled across the bottom, mine, still blank. I had placed them there like a hot coal I couldn't touch, circling them every time I walked past. For 3 days, I avoided them. I woke, went to work, came home, and stared at those papers as if they might sprout an explanation. But there was none. Just ink, just words, just the erasure of 8 years stamped into legal language. On the 4th day, my phone buzzed. A message. "Don't forget to sign. I need them by next week." No greeting. No thank you. Not even a name. Just cold instructions, as if I were his assistant, and not the woman who had once stayed up all night nursing him through the flu. I stared at the text, waiting for the sting of tears. None came. Instead, something inside me stiffened, like a broken bone calcifying into place. That night, I sat at the table, pen in hand. My fingers didn't tremble. My eyes didn't blur. I signed my name in one smooth stroke. The sound of the pen scratching against paper felt final, like closing a coffin lid. It wasn't surrender. It wasn't forgiveness. It was survival. I leaned back in the chair and let the silence fill me. For the first time in years, there was no need to wait for footsteps in the hall. No need to glance at the clock. No need to hope. The quiet was suffocating, but it was also honest. Afterward, I began packing, not for him, but for myself. I wrapped the silverware set we'd received as a wedding gift, each fork and knife tucked carefully into tissue. I boxed up photo frames, some with faces I didn't want to see anymore, but I kept them anyway. Evidence that I had lived through it. Every drawer I opened felt like prying into a past life. Receipts for the sofa, the fridge, the dining table, all in my name. Proof that the home we'd built hadn't been his generosity, but my persistence. He had walked out with clothes and electronics. I was left with the bones of our life, and strangely, that realization steadied me. At midnight, I sat alone on the couch staring at the empty space on the shoe rack. I tried to remember the man who used to fill it, the one who once showed up at my office with flowers, the one who whispered dreams of kids and road trips. But those memories felt foreign, like someone else's story. All I could hear now was the voice in my head, sharp and insistent. You've been living like a shadow. Waiting at tables set for two, excusing absence, after absence folding yourself smaller to keep the peace. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't pray. I sat in the silence and finally admitted the truth. The marriage had died long before he walked out. Tyler leaving wasn't the collapse. It was the confirmation. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something I hadn't dared hope for in years. My own life. The divorce papers had been signed, filed, and stamped, but the silence in my apartment lingered like smoke after a fire. Each night, I returned to rooms that looked the same, but felt stripped of warmth, as if the walls themselves had betrayed me by not holding him back. It was during one of those numb evenings that a notification popped up on my phone, a reminder about the 18-year high school reunion at Moonlight Brewery. I had signed up weeks earlier, back when I was still Mrs. James, back when I imagined arriving with Tyler by my side, a stable couple to be envied. Now the idea felt absurd. At first, I deleted the reminder. Why would I walk into a room full of old classmates when I couldn't even look at myself without seeing failure? But the thought wouldn't leave me. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe desperation, or maybe the quiet instinct that I needed to prove to myself that I still existed beyond the wreckage. That Saturday, I stood in front of the mirror longer than I planned. My hair pulled back, a black dress, simple but clean, a smear of wine-colored lipstick. Not glamorous, not showy, just enough to remind myself that I wasn't invisible. "You're still here?" I whispered to the woman staring back. The brewery was already buzzing when I arrived. Laughter spilled out onto the street. Inside, the air was thick with the mingling of old stories, clinking glasses, and music too loud for comfort. For a moment, I froze at the entrance, heart racing like a schoolgirl, again afraid of not belonging. Then a familiar voice cut through the noise. Isabella. I turned. At first, I didn't recognize him. He had stubble now, a warmer look than the lanky teenager I remembered. Nathan, the bassist from our high school band, the boy who used to lurk at the edges of the cafeteria crowd with quiet confidence. "I almost didn't recognize you," he said, smiling, holding out a beer. "Still the last one to show up, huh?" Something in me softened. I accepted the drink, and together, we slid into a booth tucked away from the chaos. The room around us blurred into background noise as we traded stories. Nathan told me about his divorce 3 years earlier, about raising his 6-year-old daughter alone. He didn't speak with bitterness or drama, just a quiet honesty that felt like water to my parched heart. When he asked about Tyler, I said simply, "We're getting divorced." My voice didn't crack. It felt almost like stating the weather. Nathan didn't flinch, didn't offer pity. He just nodded, sipped his beer, and changed the subject. That small act, his refusal to make me feel small, was a gift I didn't know I needed. We talked about everything else. Music work, the way Denver had changed. At one point, I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. It startled me like hearing a sound you'd forgotten you could make. Later, driving home through the cool Colorado night, I turned on the radio. An old song filled the car, Whitney Houston's "It's Not Right, But It's Okay." The lyrics hit harder than I expected, each word slicing through years of excuses I had made for Tyler. Late dinners, unread texts, hugs that turned into shrugs. I had told myself it was normal, that marriage was compromised, that I needed to be more patient. But sitting there, with the windows cracked and the night air rushing in, I realized I had been living as a shadow in my own life. That night, I didn't cry. Instead, I lay in bed replaying Nathan's steady presence, his easy laughter. He hadn't looked at me with pity. He had looked at me as if I were still me. The next morning, my phone rang. Tyler's name flashed on the screen. For a second, my body reacted with the old reflex, a jolt of hope, a whisper that maybe he had come back. But when I answered, his voice was as cold as ever. "I've informed the leasing office. We're terminating the contract by the end of the month. You should start packing." No apology, no acknowledgement of the years I had given him. Just a command, as if I were an employee being dismissed. "You don't think you should have asked if I had somewhere else to go?" I asked, voice trembling but controlled. "You're an adult. Figure it out," he said flatly. Something inside me snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. I set my mug down, speaking slowly, each word deliberate. Good. I'll sign. And don't call again. For the first time in years, I hung up without hesitation. Afterward, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers I had already signed. It was done. No second chances. No excuses left. Tyler had chosen to vanish, and I had chosen to let him. But in the quiet aftermath, one truth began to take root. I didn't need his presence to feel whole. I needed my own. And maybe, just maybe, I had caught the first glimpse of it in the warm glow of the brewery, in the laugh I thought I'd lost, in the reminder that even in the dark, there were still people who could see me. The weekend passed in a blur. I cleaned, packed a few boxes, tried to fill the silence with music or old movies, but everything felt hollow. Even when I closed my eyes, Tyler's voice lingered cold and flat, replaying that last call like a scratched record. On Tuesday night, just as I was about to turn off the lamp and surrender to uneasy sleep, my laptop pinged with a new email. The subject line read only one word: proof. My chest tightened. I clicked it open. The first thing I saw wasn't text, it was a photo. A marriage certificate. Groom Tyler Robert James. Bride Marissa Ellis Whitmore. Stamped in bold red at the bottom, Bernalillo County, New Mexico. Date of registration exactly 1 day after our divorce had been finalized. I sat frozen, eyes fixed on the screen. My hands curled into fists. He hadn't just moved on, he had been planning this. My marriage of 8 years had been quietly discarded like expired paperwork just so he could remarry the instant he was free. Before I could even process the photo, my phone buzzed. Tyler. Against my better judgment, I answered. You saw it, right? His voice carried a smugness that made my stomach twist. I told you I'd moved on. I'm married now. Life's never been better. I couldn't speak. I just listened, his words like nails being driven into a coffin that held the remnants of our life together. Her name's Marissa, he continued, drawing out the syllables. She's 36, just like you, but she's mature, gentle, and so beautiful, you'd be jealous. I clenched my jaw, letting the silence stretch. She's the only daughter of the Whitmore real estate family. Her parents gave us a house near the Southern Hills. And thanks to them, I'm already the executive vice president at their company. There it was. The real reason for the haste, the divorce, the lies. It wasn't about love, it was about elevation, position, status. He had married into power. So that's why you needed to end things so quickly, I said, my voice steady, though my insides shook. Not entirely, Tyler replied smoothly. I couldn't keep living with a woman who put work before her husband, who neglected her role as a wife. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. You mean a wife who paid half the rent, cooked, when you bothered to come home, cleaned the house you never noticed, and endured your silence like it was my fault? That kind of neglect? His tone hardened. You always make excuses. A real wife doesn't need reminders. I wanted to scream, but instead I swallowed the fire and asked, and this Marissa, does she work? No, he said proudly. She chose to take care of the home. And he paused for effect. We're expecting a baby girl, 3 months pregnant. The words landed like dull blades. I waited for the pain, the ache, the jealousy, but none came. What I felt instead was a chilling stillness. Congratulations, I said quietly. Then I ended the call, before he could glow any further. For a long time, I just sat there staring at the glowing screen, at the certificate that stamped out the last trace of our marriage. His life was already rewritten, his future carved into someone else's name. But even as the rage threatened to surface, something inside me whispered a harder truth. I wasn't jealous of Marissa. I pitied her. Because if she thought she'd married a man who valued her, she hadn't seen the cold email sent on an anniversary. She hadn't sat waiting by candlelight for someone who never came. She hadn't lived in the shadow of his indifference until her body forgot what warmth felt like. Marissa might have the house, the title, the baby. But she also had Tyler, and that was a weight I wouldn't wish on anyone. After that call, I couldn't sleep. My laptop screen glared in the dark. Tyler's smug words echoing, she's mature, gentle, so beautiful, you'd be jealous. Her name lingered in my mind, Marissa Whitmore, but something about it tugged at an old memory, faint yet persistent. I opened Facebook and typed it into the search bar. Her profile appeared instantly, her picture-perfect smile, flowing blonde hair, polished makeup. It was the kind of face you'd expect to see on a magazine cover, not in a small-town yearbook. But the more I stared, the more unease crept in. I scrolled through her photos, and then on the 10th image, my stomach dropped. It wasn't the hair, or the sculpted jawline, or even the flawless skin. It was her eyes, the exact same wide-set eyes I remembered from high school. The slightly crooked tooth she used to hide behind her hand when she laughed. Marissa Ellis, the quiet girl who sat in the back of class. The one who barely spoke, who always kept her head down, who had been teased for her acne and awkwardness. I hadn't thought about her in years, but now her face, reshaped, polished, altered, was staring back at me with a new last name and a new life. The transformation was shocking. She looked nothing like the scrawny girl who once avoided the spotlight. But I knew, beneath the surgeries and the curated glamour, it was her. I picked up my phone and dialed the one person who would remember. Lana, I said, when my best friend from high school answered. Do you remember a girl named Marissa Ellis? There was a pause, then a small laugh. Of course I do. Quiet mousy, always scribbling in that little notebook. Why I hesitated. She's married to Tyler. Lana gasped, then quickly caught herself. You're kidding. Wait, I think I still have a yearbook photo of her. Minutes later, she sent me a picture. There she was, Marissa Ellis senior year. Crooked teeth, frizzy hair, squinting into the camera. I stared at it, then at the glowing profile picture on my screen. Two different women, and yet the same. She changed everything after high school, Lana said when I called back. Moved to New York, studied art, and, well, rumor was she went through multiple surgeries. Chin, nose, eyes, jawline, basically rebuilt herself. People used to say she was strategic, knew exactly who to align herself with. I guess she still is. I didn't respond right away, because while Lana was still talking, I couldn't stop staring at those two photos side by side. The insecure girl from the past and the carefully manufactured woman Tyler had chosen for his future. And for the first time since the divorce began, a strange clarity settled over me. Tyler hadn't just replaced me. He had chosen someone just like himself, someone who erased their past, who hid behind a polished mask, who believed reinvention was the same as redemption. What he didn't realize was that the truth always has a way of leaking through cracks. And in their case, the cracks were already showing. It had been months since I'd blocked Tyler. My life had finally started finding its rhythm again. Quiet mornings, weekend art classes, dinners with Nathan. I rarely thought of Tyler except as a ghost from a life I'd buried. Then one evening, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. For some reason, I answered. Isabella, Tyler's voice spilled through the line, low and frantic. I froze. He'd found another number. Before I could hang up, he said, Marissa had the baby. His breathing was ragged. It's a girl. I stayed silent. Then he whispered, almost like a confession. She doesn't look like either of us. I let the words hang. He stumbled on his voice, sharp with panic. At first, I thought maybe she'd take after someone in the family, but I can't shake it. Every time I look at her, I feel like I'm staring at a stranger. Marissa refuses to hold her. She cries, says she can't connect. His words tumbled out in a rush, stripped of the arrogance he once wielded like a weapon. I felt a cold laugh rise. Not for the child, never for her, but for Tyler's unraveling. The man who once bragged about his flawless new life was now choking on the imperfections of reality. You once told me I failed as a wife, I said quietly. That I wasn't enough for you. Now you can't even face your own child. Don't do this, he snapped, but his voice cracked. Please, Isabella, you always understood things I didn't. Tell me why she doesn't look like us. Tell me what I'm supposed to do. I closed my eyes, remembering the old yearbook photo of him I'd found while packing the pimply skin, the crooked teeth, the boy he'd buried so deep even I had never seen it. Genetics don't lie, I said, finally. You can alter your face, change your life, build castles of glass and lies. But your child, she'll carry the truth you tried to erase. On the other end, silence. Then a ragged exhale. Marissa won't even touch her, he whispered. Her mother holds the baby instead. And when I look at her, I feel like I'm seeing the old me. The one I swore I'd never let anyone see again. I felt a pang, not for him, but for that little girl already burdened by shame she hadn't chosen. Then don't pass that shame to her, I said firmly. If you can't be honest with yourself, at least be honest with your child. She didn't ask to inherit your secrets. And before he could respond, I ended the call. My hands were steady as I set the phone down. For years, Tyler had made me feel small, disposable, never enough. But in that moment, I realized he was the one collapsing under the weight of his own lies, and I was finally free. After that final call, Tyler faded into the background like static noise I no longer tuned into. My life had been gutted, yes, but now it was also open, ready for me to rebuild, this time on my terms. I moved to Boulder into a small apartment with a balcony that caught the morning sun. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. No empty space in the shoe rack reminding me someone had left. No untouched dinners cooling on the table. Just me, my breath, and a view of green hills that felt like a promise of steadier days. I cut back my hours at work, something I'd never dared to do before. I chose balance over burnout. Weekends, I enrolled in an art class. Nothing serious, just a chance to let my hands create something that wasn't tied to survival. Clay under my nails, paint smudged on my jeans. It all felt strangely healing. Nathan and I started seeing each other more often. We didn't rush into anything, didn't make heavy promises. Instead, we shared simple moments, a quiet dinner coffee after his daughter's school drop-off, long walks, where silence felt safe instead of heavy. There was no grand romance blazing, like fire, just warmth, steady and real, like sunlight through a kitchen window. For the first time in years, I didn't check my phone for Tyler's messages. I didn't wonder where he was, who he was with, or what he was doing. The man who once swallowed every ounce of my energy now occupied no space in my life. But life has a way of circling back even when you're not looking. One crisp autumn afternoon, I ran into Lana, my old friend at a used bookstore. After catching up, she lowered her voice and asked, "You haven't heard, have you?" I shook my head. Marissa's looking for a divorce attorney. The words hit me like a jolt, but not of pain, just inevitability. Tyler cheated again, Lana continued, with a new hire at Marissa's company. She found out 3 months ago, but kept quiet because of their daughter. Their daughter, the child who had been born into a house of mirrors. But Lana wasn't finished. She pulled up her phone, showing me a screenshot from a preschool parents group. The message was cruel. Almost unbelievable kids had discovered Marissa's old photos, the ones before the surgeries, and were teasing her daughter, calling her ugly because of a face that carried the unedited truth. I stared at the screen, my heart tightening. That poor child. Mocked not for her choices, but for the choices of two parents who had tried to bury their pasts. Lana sighed. Word is, Marissa regrets having the baby. She thought the child would look like her new face. But the truth doesn't vanish. It shows up whether you want it to or not. I said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Tyler and Marissa had chosen a life built on illusions, glitter wealth, beauty crafted under a surgeon's knife. But their child carried the unvarnished truth in her blood, and no amount of money or status could erase that. As I walked home that evening, croissant in hand, the golden light falling through the trees, I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. No drama, no battles. Just rhythm, autonomy, and the fullness of a life that finally belonged to me. And for the first time in forever, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. Time has a way of revealing what people really are. I didn't have to chase updates about Tyler or Marissa. Life had a cruel efficiency in making sure their story trickled back to me. Months passed, and through whispers in old circles, I learned the unraveling was complete. Marissa had filed for divorce. Tyler had once again fallen into the same pattern, seducing someone younger, someone easier to manipulate, someone he thought would make him feel powerful. The Whitmore family had cut him off, stripping away the executive title he had flaunted so proudly. Without their money, without their status, Tyler was just a man who had burned every bridge behind him. And Marissa, she stayed in Santa Fe with their daughter, but bitterness had carved into her smile. Rumor had it she avoided school events because parents whispered, children pointed, and truth hung over her like a storm cloud she couldn't Photoshop away. The gallery she once owned quietly shuddered. The curated image she had spent years constructing collapsed under the weight of reality. Meanwhile, my life was the opposite of theirs. Not glamorous, not enviable in headlines, but steady. I woke each day without dread. I drank my coffee on the balcony, planted basil in the sun, and smiled when Nathan's daughter handed me a crayon drawing with Izzy scrawled in the corner. Sometimes, in rare moments, I thought about forgiveness. People asked me if I'd ever forgive Tyler. My answer was always the same: I don't need to. Forgiveness implies I'm still holding on to something still tethered to him. But the truth is, I let go. What he did, the choices he made, they live with him now, not me. He used to say I wasn't enough, that I failed as a wife, that I didn't sacrifice enough of myself for him. Looking back, I realized the opposite was true. I gave too much. I bent until I broke, and when he finally left, the pieces of me that remained were the ones strong enough to rebuild. And rebuild, I did. The irony of it all, Tyler and Marissa tried so hard to sculpt perfection. They carved their faces, their stories, their reputations into shapes they thought would impress the world. But what couldn't be erased, their past, their truth, their cruelty, was what defined them in the end. And me, I didn't change into someone else. I just came home to myself. That is the real aftermath. Not revenge, not spectacle, not dramatic justice, just peace. And peace after everything was the sweetest ending I could have asked for. I sometimes wonder if Tyler ever lies awake at night, staring at a ceiling he doesn't recognize, wondering how his life unraveled so quickly. Or if Marissa, when she looks in the mirror at her sculpted face, ever sees the shadows of the girl she used to be. The girl who sat in the back row of class eyes, down hoping no one would notice her. But I don't stay there long. Those questions aren't mine to carry anymore. What stays with me is the lesson hidden inside all that chaos. You cannot build a life on lies and expect it to hold. You cannot sculpt away the truth. It always finds its way back through a child's eyes, through a broken promise, through the silence of people who stop believing you. For years, I thought my worth depended on how well I could serve someone else. That if I just tried harder, waited longer, forgave faster, then maybe I would be loved the way I deserved. But love built on conditions is not love at all. It's control wrapped in pretty words. Walking away was not the hardest part. Staying gone was. Resisting the pull of old habits, of guilt, of the tiny voice whispering, maybe he'll change. But every time I made my morning coffee in the quiet of my own kitchen, every time I laughed without worrying who might roll their eyes, I knew I had chosen right. And here's what I'll leave you with. We talk so much about revenge, about getting even, about making the people who hurt us pay. But sometimes the truest form of justice is simply living well without them. To stand in your own life unashamed, unhidden, and free. So ask yourself, if the person who once defined your worth walked out tomorrow, who would you become? Would you shrink, or would you finally take up the space that was always yours? I know my answer now. Because Tyler and Marissa are still trapped in the web of lies they spun for themselves. And me, I'm finally living a life that doesn't need to be edited. What about you? If you were in my place, would you have exposed them, sought revenge, or chosen silence, like I did? I want to hear what you think. Thank you for watching and supporting these full story dramas. Your engagement keeps the channel growing.